You've done some incredible work in writing when it comes to flow state, but where I want to kick off the conversation with flow is on flight. You wrote the first draft of your first novel, The Angel Quickest for Flight, in a bar when you were a bartender. Knowing what you know now about flow, how do you reflect back on that writing process and being a bartender?
So that's funny. So I think two things. If you're going to get into flow, you don't have to be calm. Actually, at the front end of the flow state, there's a little bit of fight response, but you have to be pretty even. So the nervous system has to be well regulated, and the brain. This is going to tie up. The brain processes money fears the same way it processes physical pain, and bartending as you're coming up as a writer is the greatest job in the world. You make a ton of cash in very tight periods and you have a full social life and you learn how to talk to anybody. So you can interview anybody as a reporter. Amazing. It's amazing skills training. And I can work in bars till 2 o'clock in the morning and still get up in time to sort of work with magazines and start writing my book. So like just in terms of solving the money stuff and solving safety and security, which is really a big deal. Like we've known this about peak performance. We always tell people, where do you start is a question. Like, what's the first step? What do you start with? And the answer is you want to start with motivation. For most of us, that means curiosity, which is the foundational human motivator, unless you're food insecure or home insecure or something like that. And then you have to solve money first because the fear will actually block everything else. So bartending was really great for that. I think writing a bar, I was a bartender. So like I would come to work early and just sit there and, write before I went on, that kind of stuff. And I got really good at tuning out the entire world. I could sit in a crowded bar and write and write. And so for focus training, and it was like there wasn't really a choice. I went to college at the University of Wisconsin. Home was like 3 miles away. Winter was like 80 below. I didn't have a car. You'd have to walk. You didn't do that. Like it just like you came into town, you stayed in town, you went home when it was all said and done, and you tried to get a ride. So like there wasn't really much of a choice. But I think it was great focus training. So flow follows focus. And by training myself to have task specific focus and block out a bar, I was really good at that. Where that has come in handy later on, and this is the last bit, is if you have that skill, novelty is a great flow trigger. It produces dopamine, which drives focus, which drives flow. One of the easiest ways when we work with anybody, executives, doesn't matter, who want more flow in their life, how much novelty are you getting? And you can get it in really light ways, going to a cafe and just that you've not been to before, right? That's enough to start doing it. And it's got a lot of positive downstream stuff, but not if you're really distractible and you can't lock out focus. You need a little bit of novelty. But so to give you one final example to sort of make it really practical for myself, I obviously have to, well, obviously, I don't know, but I read a lot of neuroscience textbooks. I actually really like reading textbooks, and it's part of the job as far as I'm concerned. So once every 3 months or whatever, I tend to go someplace new and with this express intention of just like sitting in a hotel room with a balcony, looking at mountains I've never seen before, that bit of novelty enough to start the dopamine flowing, and it helps a lot, right? You don't have to read neuroscience textbooks when you're not in flow. But when you read them in flow, they're exciting. Ideas are popping and one thing's leading to the next. And then the texts actually start reading like normal books. And that's really exciting. So that was a long answer to a really like simple question, but it's actually a really good question. I got a tremendous amount out of bartending, actually.
Yeah, I love it. And that's what I found so fascinating because it wasn't that you just started within this scientific flow approach, but it was like, okay, like he had a real job. When I was reading your book and I found out about you being a bartender, I kind of like visualized, I was like, wow, like I feel like bartending could actually be incredible for flow state.
Yeah, and bartending itself is the flowiest damn thing in the world.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so flowy. And especially when you're young and you get to flirt along the way, right?
Yeah,
I mean, like,
yeah,
you're young,
yeah,
you get to flirt, which is a tremendous amount of dopamine. You can't bartend and not be in the zone, right? Like, I worked
yeah,
at really, some of the bars I worked at were really crowded, really crazy. And, like, you see, like, you'd have a memory that it would be over, and like, you'd remember, like, the first three customers walk in, and maybe like somebody broke up a fight in the middle of the night, and, and suddenly it's the end of the night, and you're like, what happened? How did we get here? What, like, who are these people? What are you doing in my living room?
yeah. And I mean, I think that's the realization that I had about myself when it comes to podcasting, where I'm like, wow, this is so good for flow
The other
state.
thing is it's fun just talking to strangers and learning about them, right? As a
Yeah.
writer, as a storyteller, and later as somebody who was training other people in peak performance, it's just really great that I like, I know people from every strata. I've worked in biker bars, I've worked in steel mill bars, I've worked in intellectual bars where everybody bartending with me had PhDs. I've worked like I've It's a great education in humanity, which is a great thing if you're trying to help people perform better, um, or sell them things. Well, in both cases, like learning about your market, learning about your customer, you know what I mean? Like both on both sides of that, it helped me as a businessman and it helped me as a flow guy. I don't know.
Are flow state and peak performance interchangeable words, or what's the difference?
No, it's a great question, and thank you for starting there. So I define peak performance loosely as simply as getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. And that biology, if we push aside physical skills, that biology actually stratifies into five. There's really four skills, cognitive skills. We have a whole suite of motivation skills. We got a whole suite of learning skills. We've got a suite of creative and innovative skills, creative problem solving skills. And then we have flow skills. And flow is how we turbo boost everything else. It is technically defined as an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and perform our best. Csikszentmihalyi came out of the humanistic movement in psychology. He's technically a personality psychologist, but he's in that tradition of Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers and that whole group. And um, as psychologists, they were trying to differentiate peak performance, which seemed to apply to athletes or soldiers, from the full suite of cognitive performance. But this is really just like, honest to God, it's like an anti-jock bias. It's psychologists, not, this is back in the day when there was a real divide between like the nerds and the jocks. It's gone away now, but I grew up in it. And it was a real significant, like I got in fights with jocks all the time because they did not like me, right? That's changed now, but like that was my childhood for sure. And you forget things like that. So the psychologists didn't like the jocks. They were, so like peak performance was not a term they were ever going to use because that was for jocks and soldiers. They were going to say optimal performance, which talked about the whole human and the emotions and well, I mean, there is no such thing as peak performance without the whole human and the emotions and, all the softer skills and everything else. There's no divide, doesn't exist. It's like the mind body divide. There were all these things that people came up with in the 20th century psychologists to try to put things into categories before we actually understood the neurobiology. And the categories are really like loose and slippery. And I could go on about this. There are people who have written books about how the terms of psychology came up with are frames for things that we're seeing in the world that try to actually describe brain function that happens in here. And it's not quite right. And it gets into a lot of trouble when you want to start doing things like helping people or training like the work we do at the Flow Research Collective, where we use neurobiology to teach people how to do stuff.
A phrase that I've heard you use a lot, and you used it there earlier as well, is how we need to get biology to work for us rather than against us. Is biology naturally set up to run against us?
No, I actually think it's naturally set up to drive us towards flow. I think we will naturally proceed towards peak performance. And let me give you my evidence. One of the things I noticed as I started training people, and this is globally, right? The Flow Research Collective, 168 countries, I think 28 industries, got a really good map, 50% male, 50% female in our customer base. So it's a pretty good, accurate global map of what works and what doesn't. And you don't, that you don't see many differences sort of wherever you go. It's The same triggers work the same way. The same systems work the same way. And that's the advantage of biology, of course, right? It's universally considered. That was also the suspicion when we started the collective and we started this work. It was they had tried training flow back in the 90s using psychology. She sent me high, the godfather of flow psychology, and a brilliant, wonderful woman named Susan Jackson, who's a sports psychologist from Australia. They wrote a book about it called Flow in Sports, and their success rate was terrible. We at the Flow Research Collective measure everything. We use the exact same flow scale to measure that they used, and we see a reliable, repeatable 78% increase in flow, which is what happens when you train from the neurobiology because it's mechanism, because it's shared between people.
To emphasize the point of scaling, I know that's really central to your work. In terms of personality doesn't scale, biology scales. Why is that so critical to your work, and how do you go about drawing that line between the two?
Great question. Tricky answer. Let me start with a slight story about how I learned this, because I learned this the hard way. I think I did what most people do when they start to coach people or become, an expert in anything, is they start to tell their friends how to live. I had written a couple books at this point, and so I had some authority here. People thought I actually knew what I was talking about, and I did from a neurobiological standpoint, but from a coaching standpoint, I was trying to teach people what worked for me. My risk tolerances are wildly out of whack with a lot of people's. I'm on a bunch of different spectrums. I'm a weirdo. I had a strange childhood. I had a strange adulthood. I went out of my way to have those things. What works for me was a disaster in other people's lives. I mean, a disaster. I put one friend in the hospital. I nearly broke up a couple of marriage. They're still married today. It's 20 years later, 30 years later. I mean, I was a fucking disaster. And I was like, what is going wrong? This is horrible. So immediately I shut up, and I literally didn't train another person for 15 years until we really actually figured out what the hell we knew what I was doing. But it was my first look at, oh wow, personality doesn't scale. Risk tolerance is very individual. Introversion to extroversion, very individual. A bunch of things like that, which really affect how I would train you, help you, work with you. They're shaped by genetics and environment, and that's personality, and it's very individual. And if I try to train you to fit my stuff, it's literally the rule, as far as I can tell, is what you said. If the surest way to fail is if it works for me, it's going to not work for you. And I see this all the time. I see coaches so often figure out something that works for them, and then they try to teach it to other people. And sure, if you have an accolade who's a carbon copy of you, it may work, but it's only going to work for a while. 3 years, 5 years, then it's going to break. It's going to shatter, and you're going to have some big break where they leave the master, right? That's guaranteed. And for everybody else, it's really not going to work. And it was so frustrating to me. And I started to think, wow, it's more than frustrating. It's dangerous. I put somebody in the hospital. I've almost broke up a marriage. I saw other people. I've met coaches, lovely people, really big-hearted people trying to really help their clients. I met one guy out of South Florida who was punching people in the face in a boxing ring because he thought it was going to teach them grit. And I was like, you're what? And the reason I mean, that sounds funny, but I was a competitive martial artist as a kid. I took one bad kick to the face. Everything here up is plastic because everything had to get rebuilt because my nose went through my eye socket. And I had 10 years of chronic sinus infections afterwards. And because they rebuilt it wrong, and then they had to redo the surgery. It was one of the most painful surgeries I've ever gone through. And that was one kick gone wrong. That's what happens when a punch goes wrong. And this dude was punching people in the face because he thought it was a good way to train grit. I was like, do you know what happens when that goes wrong? I can tell you because it went wrong in my life. And I had a headache for 10 years and two of the worst surgery. And I've had a lot of surgery, and they were the worst surgeries I've been through, the most pain, the worst wall of pain to wake up into ever. Terrible surgeries. And so I've seen really dumb things done in the name of personality. I made some of those mistakes, and I see a lot of people making those mistakes. And I think it's, for all the obvious reasons, it's dangerous, but I also think it gives the profession I'm in, applied neuroscience, it's not It's applied neuroscience. This is like we're doing a very specific thing here. It's not this giant free for all. And I see a lot of examples of the giant free for all and people throwing around neuroscience terms as if they meant anything. And I'm like, be careful. Like I try to be careful and I still make mistakes right and left, but like, just be careful, please.
I know there's a lot of people that are interested in flow state. And what I love about your work so much is it's a very methodical way of going about it where it breaks it down point by point. And it can be kind of overwhelming at times from the consumer perspective. Can you walk me through the 4-stage cycle of flow?
So we used to believe back in the 20th century that flow was a binary. You're in the zone, you're out of the zone, works like a light switch. And it turns out that's not the case. Like a great many things in the body, it's a cycle. It's a 4-stage process. Not all the stages feel flowy. In fact, some of them feel awful. Flow is an unconscious process. It's essentially you learn a whole bunch of skills, and when your brain can put all those skills together at once and execute them effortlessly, perfectly, that's what flow is. But at the front end of any flow state, you have to learn those skills. So there's always a struggle phase. That's where it starts. That's where the cycle starts. This is onboarding. You're learning the skills. And sometimes this is like something really obvious. Like you remember, if you ever learned how to swing a baseball bat, there's like 11 different things. You got to keep your eye on the ball, step through the pitch, swing through, like all the shift your hips, all the step into the right, on and on and on. If your experience was anything like mine, I learned them like 2 at a time, 3 at a time. It took a little while. I had to get strong enough to hold the bat, all that stuff. It takes a little while for it to come together. That's a great example. A struggle stretched out over a longer period of time. Or it could just be like me. It's right. I'm working on my section of whatever book I'm writing, and I'm struggling to get the sentences to work. They're not quite clicking yet. I'm fighting with them. And it turns out what's cool about struggle, it's interesting. Most people, it's frustrating. It's frustrated by design. I could go into a lot of neurobiology, why you're frustrated and struggle, but like you're frustrated, it sucks. But that frustration is actually a sign you're moving in the right direction, which is a really cool thing to know. And research by a marvelous woman named Colleen Seifert, who's at the University of Michigan, discovered that the more frustrated you get, the more you sort of learn about the problem and just get frustrated with it, the better chance you're going to solve it, get into flow, have a big intuitive breakthrough. So that frustration is actually a sign you're moving in the right direction. The next thing you got to do is, because what you have to do is you got to pass the problem from your conscious mind over to your subconscious. Way more powerful. Way more powerful. To do that, you got to take your mind off the problem. Second stage is known as release. You're literally distracting yourself. Low-grade physical exercise is what works best. A long walk in nature, not even a long walk, 20-minute walk in nature. I draw. So I'll do 10-minute microdosing of creativity as a release activity. Little breath work, right? Round of Wim Hof breathing. Take your pick, but all that, just take your mind off the problem. It actually is funny. A friend of mine, Lee Slodoff, did a study of this with some folks at Brown, I want to say, and they found that the best release activity they could find was building model airplanes. By the way, crazy, but this is also why insights happen in the shower. You work all day hard on a problem. You come home, you want to wash off your day, and the shower is just enough distraction, a little serotonin, et cetera, that it kicks you into a release phase. This is the same cycle. This is the incubation period in the creativity cycle. It's the same thing. Next phase is flow, right? Now your subconscious says, shoot on it, suddenly the insight pops into your head, boom, you're in flow, right? That's the third stage of the cycle. And flow is a big, biologically big reaction. It takes a little bit of energy to produce, a bunch of neurochemicals get released. They have limited supply. So on the back end of flow state, what goes up must come down. There's a recovery period, a refractory period. And you have to respect it. It's why people who are really good at flow work 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. They have active recovery protocols, sauna, Epsom salt baths, restorative yoga, breath work, that sort of stuff. Also at the end of the day, so you can shut it all down and recover. And because you're going to wake up and struggle again and you want to start over. And it seems like, so there's one other thing I should tell you, which is flow is a spectrum of experience. It's not one experience. It's like anger, right? You're a little irked or homicide and murderous. It's the same spectrum. Flow is micro flow, a little bit of flow. You're focused on the task at hand. This is when you sit down at work and you got to write an email to a colleague, and you get sucked into your email. You thought you were going to write like a paragraph, and you end up writing an essay, and like an hour goes by and you didn't notice, right? So that's a lot of classic flow: complete concentration, merger of action and awareness, time just distorted. We didn't notice it was passing. Your sense of self disappears in flow. Maybe in micro flow, self doesn't disappear, but what happens to all of us all the time is you wake back up, you're like, oh my God, I wrote an essay and I got to pee, right? So bodily awareness goes away. This happens to all of us all the time. That's micro flow. We're in micro flow 5-10% of our work life. We don't even notice. It happens all the time, but you can get a really solid, like 1 or 2 of those a day for sure. Macro flow is the other end of the spectrum. It's when all those things are turned up to 11. So not only does our sense of self, completely vanish, but we start to become one with everything, and we merge with consciousness. And we know the biology behind it, but that's like macro flow. And in macro flow, this is where like action awareness works, but like the surfer becomes one with the wave, or the writer becomes one with the words, or it's that sort of experience, and joyous and ecstatic, like all flow states are, but really memorable on the macro flow experience. So we have micro flow all the time. We have macro slightly more rarely, though much more common. The performing arts, anybody who gives speeches, anybody who plays in a band, anybody who does theater, improv, macro flow, hotbeds, spoken word, hip hop, and same thing with action sports and some regular sports. And it really depends on your level of expertise in the sport itself. But basketball, for example, it's a game of flow. I've written articles about this. I do a lot of work with people in the NBA. Like, you win basketball by getting your team into flow and knocking the other team out of flow. And it's a game of runs, right? And that's in flow, out of flow, in flow. And it's literally, the team that can get into flow in the last quarter wins. That's what they're playing. That's the game, right? Basketball's got a great athletic skill, but the mental game is, are you in flow? Can you knock the other team out of flow? And certain offenses are better at flow than others, right? There's nothing particularly flowy about, like, do you remember when the Lakers used to have Shaq and they would play that plotting half court offense that, like, you could literally read War and Peace in between baskets. It was just so slow, right? That was flowy for Shaq. Nobody else. And when it wasn't flowy for Kobe, he let you know, right? He got pissed and let everybody know, versus Dan Antonio's like that crazy, let's score in the first 11 seconds. Very flowy offense. The triangle, the old Chicago Bulls offense, when they knew what they were doing, very flowy. Okay, I could talk basketball for a long time. We'll stop.
Phil Jackson's got to be the king of flow when it comes to.
I have friends who are friends with him, and I've been trying so hard to get in a room with Phil, and they're like, well, what are you going to bring to the table? And I was like, I could bring some flow stuff. And they're like, Phil doesn't care. He's retired. He's done coaching. And I was like, shit, I don't know what I can offer Phil. Dying to get in a room.
Love of the game, though. Love of the game and passion.
Love of the game. I know I've gotten to know George Karl and his son Kobe Karl very well. So I've gotten to pick some amazing NBA minds about coaching too, which is really cool.
Interesting. I'm really interested about the relationship between flow and physical pain. I do a lot of work with people when it comes to chronic back pain, and the mind-body connection is a central part of the work that I do with people. So when somebody doesn't feel physical pain or exhaustion, is that because there's some type of other physical change, or is that more so just the shift in our mental perception of those sensations?
Let me first say, I broke my back 4 years ago. Exploded my L4 and L5 facet. I mean, like spiderwebbed it. I'm one of the first people in history to use stem cells to fix a broken back. By the way, so it's back. My back is back. But I've broken everything. I lived with chronic back pain for about 3 years, somewhere between like a 5 and a 6, sometimes up to a 7 on the pain scale. It was the hardest thing I've ever dealt with. So I'm just saying this because my sympathy goes out. My heart goes out to those people. I live with that it is really hard. And to talk about a flow blocker, wow, is it hard to push back past that? The answer to your question is there are a bunch of neurochemicals that underpin flow. Among them are anandamide and endorphins. So anandamide is the exact same psychoactive that is found in marijuana. It's an endocannabinoid. We have an internal endocannabinoid system, right? It's a second immune system, essentially. It runs on anandamide. When you smoke pot, take an edible, whatever, it's pushing up anandamide. Why do you smoke pot? To provide cancer relief, pain relief, because it deadens pain. So that's part of it. The other part is endorphins are internal opiates. Endorphins mean opiates internal, right? There are 20 endorphins. The most common is 100 times more potent than medical morphine. So when you're in flow, you're the most really like high level anandamide. And I don't know what that did. Like I've never heard somebody say, oh, it drops. I find that anandamide can usually, like getting stoned. I've broken a lot of bones. I've healed a lot of stuff. I don't like opiates. So I'll use marijuana way more. And I find if my pain is at a 6, it'll take it to a 4, but it's a dull 4 that I can ignore, right? It usually gets to the point that I can ignore it. So I don't know how you compare that. But that's why flow works. In fact, funny story, I've got a new knee. I've got a brand new ACL, and I was skiing the other day, and I'm just now at the point in the recovery. I'm 9-10 months in, but a month ahead of schedule in my training, and I can start to ski like me. I can go faster. I can go off piste. I can cut. And I fucking took a really sharp turn around a tree, and my knee hurt, and I was really worried because I was deep in flow. And I was like, oh crap, when this, like, I can't, it hurt a little. And I was like, I was like, I can't tell if I just hurt myself or not, because this feels great. I'm having a blast of my life, but I got to go shut it down now. And I was fine. I actually didn't hurt the knee, but I was like, I couldn't tell. And I've learned sometimes with certain times, like my back pain, for example, now, like, I've got low-grade chronic back pain that's going to come back when I ski. It's not sharp enough to get me off the hill, and I can usually flow through it until the end of the day. But when the flow goes away, I'm like, oh yeah, you broke your back. I can tell. Like, there it is.
Are you familiar with the work of Dr. John Sarno at all when it comes to mind-body work and chronic back pain, or no?
No. That name sounds a little familiar, though.
So he's had a profound, he's dead now, but his work had a profound impact on my life. So similar to you, I had 2 massive disc herniations in my lumbar spine, L4, L5, and L5S1. All different types of physical treatments didn't help me. Physical therapy, shots, was very, very close to getting surgery. And then I found out about Dr. John Sarno and his work on the mind-body connection and how,
I'm making a note.
How chronic back pain.
What do I read?
The Mind-Body Prescription by him, and also Healing Back Pain by Dr. John Sarno.
One thing I have to say, because you've brought it up 2 or 3 times, and it's just worth. So, are you familiar with Ellen Langer at Harvard?
Yep. Yeah.
Ellen's my favorite. Ellen's lovely. I love her. She's amazing. She's a huge hero of mine, and I just really, we've had her on our podcast. We tried to do some research together. We haven't done it yet, but she's just amazing. But her work, if anybody has literally, like, you're young enough that you don't remember this, but when I came into this field in the early 1990s, the mind-body connection, like, there was no mind-body connection. Yeah. Don't talk about the mind-body connection. Don't talk about consciousness. Don't talk about emotions. These are not real topics for science. Like, you would get laughed out of the freaking room. And I took flow, Rick Doblin took psychedelics, Richie Davidson took meditation, Andy Newberg took mystical experiences, and Ellen Langer took the mind-body connection. It took freaking a whole bunch of other people, right? And it took like 20, 30, 40 people working like step by step for 30 years to like disavow us of like the errors of the 20th century. It took a lot of work. A lot of people worked really hard on that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the main goals with my podcast, is to have a lot of conversations within this space like that. I've also had Andy Newberg on the show a couple months back.
My mentor.
He's done incredible work.
I owe him my career. I mean, like, he took me under his wing. That's the reason I have a career. We're actually funny story. it's now 30 years later after, he took me under his wing and I became, I learned neuroscience from Andy. Um, we're doing, we finally got back together to do more research, and we're doing really funny, interesting work on faith and sports and flow and winning. We asked, Andy's a hockey player and he wanted to know, and I've been wanting to know, he's like, I see all these athletes praying and I want to know, do they win more? Do people who have faith win more? Does it correlate? So we actually did it. We've done a study. We did a study. We've got data where it's coming out probably in about a month and a half.
This is like a divine moment for me right now, and I have to forward you this email. I didn't get a response back from him, unfortunately, after we recorded together, but I sent him an email asking that exact same question because I was like, you always see these athletes in post-game interviews or whatever, very faithful. Like, I just need to thank God first. And I'm like, I'm
going to blow your mind.
Where is the research on this?
Yeah. Okay, so there's no research. We did the very first study, and this is not exact, so I'm going to overstate the data to make it clear. But there's no correlation between faith and winning. We couldn't find one. But there turns out that prayer is a flow trigger. So praying pre-game will drive you into flow, which does correlate with winning. So faith doesn't actually correlate with winning, but prayer works as a flow trigger and a pre-game ritual, and it produces more flow, makes you more flow prone, and as a result, you win more. So that's what we discovered. It's fascinating. I was so excited when we actually it was the AI found the prayer thing. Like I wasn't even looking at it in the data. Like it popped out, and I was like, of course. Like it was so obvious. As soon as I saw it, I was like, why didn't I think of that? That's really obvious. Like that makes a great deal of sense. But it's also I laugh about it because of Andy Newberg and I were just talking about this back in the 90s, because there was such prejudice against so much of this work. The first thing we had to prove collectively, like everybody wanted to do this work on consciousness and altered states and performance and all this stuff. The first thing we had to actually prove was religion was good for you, because there was such a hostility towards anything spiritual. So back in the 90s, those early studies, and they were done at Duke, that it turns out going to church, going to temple, you live longer, right? We now know it's Langer pro-social, right? We know why now, and we understand all the mechanism. But in the beginning, they were like, we had to actually prove it, right? That going to church, having religious belief, being spiritual once we could prove that it had health and longevity impact, suddenly, it's science. And we could, that was the wedge issue. It's the strangest thing now, because nobody even talks about that work anymore. It's sort of laughable to think otherwise, in a sense. But people forget that at the time, atheism was really in vogue, and you had people like Christopher Hitchens and a bunch of others talking about how belief in God was mental illness, or having spiritual beliefs were a form of insanity, right? Like they were trying to make that argument, and they were really having an argument with the Christian right, and it was really over stem cells. Right. That was like Reagan decided that he wanted to politicize the Christian right for the first time. And then there was arguments over stem cells. And it was a really weird quagmire that nobody remembers now, but it hugely shaped all the work that we're all doing now.
You've said that luck really just means frequent access to flow. When it comes to things like happiness, joy, meaning, and purpose, are all these emotions that can feel intangible and hard to define, are they really just romanticized words for flow as well?
That's kind of an awesome question. So meaning is a distinct system in the brain from flow, but when flow shows up at the same time as meaning, we tend to really believe those things. So for example, I have done work with a lot of 3-letter agencies and, points in the military. What happens in a terrorist training camp? They do standard brainwashing techniques to loosen up keep people up late, don't give them food, tilt their consciousness, and then be very nice to them and put them into flow and teach them new things. And they will adopt the new beliefs. And that's how you create a zealot. Like it's a known, like that's what you do. We've not, and by the way, that formula is not new. If you read 1984, that's based on actual brainwashing techniques used in, I want to say, World War One, that Orwell was writing about. So this is not new news, right? This is very old news, but it's not particularly well incorporated into how, when I work with the military, I always explain to them, you're dealing with an addiction. You think you're dealing with something that's being caused by social or class or politics. You're dealing with a physical addiction, and you have to treat it like an addiction. If you actually, so we've had those conversations. So meaning is separate from flow, but purpose is separate from flow, but woven in very much. And some of it gets really weird. So I'll give you an example. Autonomy, which is the drive to steer our own ship. You wouldn't think that has anything to do with flow, but it turns out autonomy and focus are coupled systems in the brain. So you can't pay maximum attention to something if you're not the one you're not doing it by choice. So you can't actually get into flow without like sort of free will in that kind of direction and things like that. And so some of those systems, they're not the same thing. They are neurologically distinct, but they are super related. You can't have one without the other. And some of them are now the same thing. So happiness is now, there are 3 tiers of happiness. The first one is, how do you feel right here, right now? That's not a flow-based thing at all. It's based on a bunch of other stuff. The flow can impact how happy you feel. But the next 2 definitions, the next level up is enjoyment. Second best we get to feel on the planet is enjoyment. It's defined as a high flow activity where the thing that's driving us into flow is aligned with our goals. The best we get to feel on the planet is purpose. And that's when the thing that we're trying to do that drives us into flow helps people greater than ourselves. There's all kinds of evolutionary reasons for this. Like, it's really good for the species, and we can go into that if you want, but they're very intertwined, and they're very intertwined systems. But purpose is a thing where flow is a state of consciousness. And flow will underpin, purpose will strengthen, it will drive it forward. You can't really have purpose without a lot of flow. I mean, you can, but it doesn't work so well. But it's a great question. And it's funny because when I first came in and started doing this work, I was asking a similar question, but at a different scale. I was like, are mystical experiences flow states? Like, when somebody gets into a trance state while meditating, are we talking about, like, we didn't know. Now we know, they're slightly different and related, but we know how they're different and we know how they're related. We have not understand the neurobiology. But in the beginning, that was the biggest hurdle to this work, was people thought flow were mystical experiences, and nobody wanted to talk about mystical experiences out loud because you sounded flaky, right? There was an anti-religion bias, especially in the 80s and the 90s. And so that was one of the big hurdles, coming in.
Yeah, I find that really interesting. And when I was reading some of your books and going over your work, I think that's the thing that helped me the most, where it really concretized things and made it feel tangible, rather than thinking about these things like happiness, joy, where it's like, okay, like, what does that truly mean? Where it's like, okay, like, let's stick to.
Well, that's what you got it first. That's what drove me into the neuroscience in the first place. It's like, what the fuck are all these synonyms? When I was a little kid, I had a problem with synonyms. Like, I didn't understand. There were a lot of names for body parts, and I didn't understand that a lot of those names were the same thing. I was like, do women have like 7 things down there? Because there's so many terms. I'm very confused. And I sort of felt the same way when I started to learn psychology in college, and I started trying to figure this stuff out. I was like, what do all these fucking terms mean? They're so squishy. In fact, I just had last week, Scott Barry Kaufman was on our podcast, and he's a psychologist and a great friend of mine. And we had our forever argument, which is, I don't like psychology because it's squishy, and he doesn't like neurobiology because he doesn't think it gets you far enough into, whatever. And we actually had the same argument, but I'm on your side. Like, I look at all the terms in psychology, and I'm like, the best thing that these are anchored in is somebody came up with a model, and a model doesn't get me very far. It's still like, it's a finger pointing at the moon. It's not the moon, and they're reductive. And if you're trying to, I find that models, again, and with this is why psychologists bug me and they get into trouble. Coaches figure out what works for them and train other people. Psychologists find a model that aligns with their personality and they train people from that model. And when not all psychologists, but I've seen that happen
Interesting.
as well. And it always, that was the stuff that made me crazy. Not because I thought I was like, it's not useful. I can't, maybe this is useful for some people, right? Because obviously I was Scott Barry Kaufman, incredibly useful for him. He can train himself and steer himself from the psychology. And there's probably a ton of people who are like that. I'm like you. I was baffled. I was like, I'm not smart enough, or I can't figure this out, or like, one of the things that I think is really fun about having a Vipassana meditation practice is you start getting a really clear sense of exactly what do we mean by joy? What do we like? Those are actually like, those are real things in the body. They have geometry, they have shape, they have tingling sensations, and like there's actually physicality to them. And when you actually get good at the sort of the interoceptive part that comes along with Vipassana meditation, you're like, oh shit, I can start to answer some of these questions. But especially at the beginning of my journey, I was baffled. I was like you. I was like, I don't know what you're freaking talking about. Give me something. How does it work? Tell me how it works.
I think I like the psychological side of things as well, but I know for me that it needs to be balanced with the data and the science behind it. And I think that's something that like just recently I kind of made that realization about myself and what has really helped me.
I will tell you, by the way, that one of the I think one of the signs of like the development of expertise, more mature intellects. I always say that like the smarter people start to realize that you have to know, like it's not even, you're going to learn the psychology. You got the biology, the neuroscience, you learn the psychology, and then you're like, oh fuck, I need the embodied cognition. Oh, I need the history of mind. And I always say, people ask me like, what do you think your job really is? And I say, I think my job is to translate between languages. And what I mean by that is the neurochemistry folks don't speak the same language as the computational neuroscientists who can't talk to the cognitive psychologists, et cetera, the embodied cognitive people. And I think because I started out as a journalist, I had this wide view. That was what I saw. I was like, oh, wow, if we could get all these people talking to one another, we're going to get somewhere. Because what I started to notice, especially when I was interviewing top scientists, I was like, it's not that the really good ones, they don't just know vertical. They don't have a vertical. They're not just depth. They're width. They can tell me how this idea relates to this idea in this field, and it goes out a little bit. And I was like, oh, there's something here. I'm going to try to learn to do that and think that way. And I have found, and I always get confident around people, like I'm comfortable around people who do what you just did, where you're like, yeah, I need the psychology. I also need the neuroscience, and I probably need, and I'm like, okay, yeah, you're doing your homework. You're thinking about these things the right way. In my opinion, I could be wrong. I've just seen it so often in like the smart people who I'm like, wow, I really admire the way you think, not just like your ideas, but how they like what you could do with them in the world. That seems to be a commonality. I also noticed that like everybody, sooner or later, you have to add evolutionary biology to your thinking. If you can't think about things in terms of evolution, that's a weakness actually in your game. That's one of the things I always tell people. If you want to get smart, like learn the psychology, learn the neuroscience, learn the evolution too. Take the time to learn a little bit about evolutionary biology and psychology, because you can't think about these things properly, I think, without it. But I could be a snob. I don't know at this point.
Speaking of games, I like the framework you use of seeing peak performance as a game with whatever work and passions that we undertake. Why is that framing of playing a game rather than trying to accomplish a goal so helpful?
Couple of things there. So peak performance is an infinite game, is how I talk about it, because you can't win. You can definitely lose, though. It's an interesting infinite game because you can definitely lose, but you cannot win. It's an endless game. And let me put it this. My best friend plays guitar, and he has a statement I love, which is, he's like, I love the guitar because I will never run out of guitar. There's an endless amount of things to write. I love drawing. I love writing. I love flow science. Like, because they're never going to run out. They're endless. I will tell you, Stephen, what's your goal? I want to be the best writer in the history of the universe. Is that a thing? No. I'm really happy it's not a thing, which is the other reason I like it as an infinite game. So not everybody is wired this way, but I see this a lot in the Flow Research Collective, and it always makes me wince. And I don't exactly tell people not to do it, but I always go, God, I don't know if I would do this. When people start setting goals, because humans function best with 3 tiers of goals: clear goals, a daily to-do list, so you know what you focus on; high hard goals, which are your 3 to 5 year action plans; and then mission level goals, right? And they should all funnel towards one another. What you do today should feed your high hard goals, should feed your mission. And that's when we're most motivated. And I see a lot of people, especially on high hard goals, set money goals. I want to make $1 million this year. And money goals, those kind of I don't like outcome goals. Outcome goals tend to ratchet up stress, and they end up being demotivating. So I like process goals. So it's not, I want to make $1 million this year, but it's, I want to advance my book by 1,000 pages a day, because maybe that's how I make $1 million, or whatever it is. I like process goals, and outcome goals freak me out. And one of the things about an infinite game is it's a process goal. So if you get that you're playing a process goal, you're not, right? Now, there are certain people, this is again the personality thing. This is why I don't say anything. There are people where outcome goals work for them, right? They're actually a slim minority statistically, but how do you know unless you test it yourself and see what works for you and what fails? And certain things, like, I can set outcome goals I can say, I'm going to finish this book in October, because I've written 14 books. I know exactly how long it's going to take me to finish a book. And I actually know that if I tell you I'm going to finish it in October, I'm probably going to finish it in June, because I can, that's how that shit works for me. Doesn't freak me out at all. Whereas other people who have never written a book before and they really want to, I train people in flow for writers. If they were to say, I got to write a book in a year, it'd be like me saying, I'm going to make $1 million this year. Fucking freak them out, right? And people like in finance who work with money for a living and have zero fear around money and risk and things like that, they can set money goals without, it doesn't even, their pulse doesn't even move, right? So again, personality is very individual there, but that's why and I think it's true. I think performance is an infinite game, and I don't think you're ever going to get there. And the other thing that I think is really important about this, and this is sort of worth saying out loud, just because not enough people say it out loud, and it's like, God, I wish somebody had told me this when I was younger. It would have saved me a lot of heartache. It doesn't get any easier. You just get better at it. And that's, as far as I can tell, and I'm 57 now, it has never gotten easier. I've gotten almost everything I've set out to do. I've accomplished way more than I thought I was ever going to accomplish. I'm really sort of proud of the work I've done and the people I've gotten to do it with. But it has gotten harder. Every year it's harder. I'm just better at it. I mean, maybe if I didn't constantly keep ratcheting up because the game is like, you're like, well, okay, I did that. What else can I do? Okay, I did that. What else can I do? That's the game. Yeah. That's peak performance. That's the infinite game. Maybe if I stop playing that way, it'll get easier, but I don't know anybody who it gets easier for.
That's really interesting. And I'm fully aligned with you. I think within my own personal life as well, I see it as I'm focused on input-based goals rather than output-based goals. And so the output is kind of just a byproduct.
Control what you can control. I'll give you a flip side of one. You probably do this too. I don't do this to anybody I work with. And in fact, I'm launching a new high-level mastermind for creative leaders known as the Alliance right now, because I've been wanting to work on a really intimate basis with creative leaders for a while. And this is one. I don't have many rules because you can't tell creatives what to do, right? That's one of the fun things about working with creatives is they're real adults. You can't tell them what to do. You just got to tell them how it works and get the fuck out of the way. It's totally backwards. Knowledge workers want give me 50 steps and a checklist. I have a boss. My filter for who gets into this thing or not is entrepreneurs and leaders. I'm if they got a boss, this is probably not right for them. It's a really simple filter. But one of the only rules I have is if you're talking about a problem that you're actively not working out to solve, if you're talking about politics, if you're talking about your neighbors, if you're talking about whatever, you're just gossiping, and we don't gossip. Which is it's the inverse of the same thing, right? Yeah. Like if you're not actively working on the problem to fix it, you're just gossiping. Gossiping is terrible for the brain. It's bad for you, right? So it's one of the ways you can get rid of a lot of sort of negative thinking and a lot of kind of negativity with that one sort of simple rule. And it holds people really accountable also to what they believe in, which is good, right? It forces you into a position of authenticity. And there's a lot of, you probably know, there's just a lot of peak performance benefits from authenticity. We're designed to be authentic beings. And so and when it comes to infinite games and the peak performance works, this is really cool. You have the highest flow tool in your arsenal. You have an authentic play style, right? And it can be used when you're being creative and expressing yourself as a writer or a musician. It could be used as an athlete when you're expressing yourself on the playing field. It could be, expressed in a business leader leading a meeting or in a conversation with your wife or whatever. We have an authentic play style. And it's like once you can tune into it, it's instant flow, right?
That's really cool.
It's why comedians are miserable people as a general rule, except when they're on stage. But they have an authentic play style on stage, and it's so flowy that it helps them deal with all the heaviness. You want to be in the saddest room you've ever go to a room with professional comedians and sit with them. It's the harshest room you'll ever be in. You'll never be in a room that hard ever again.
Well, I think that's a great segue to talking about passion, actually, because you've talked about this a lot. And within our society, we definitely have a romanticized perception of what passion is and what it feels like. And I actually recently just learned that the Latin root for passion comes from the word passio, which means to suffer. Why is it important to understand that component of passion when it comes to our work?
If you're interested in peak performance, you want to start with motivation. And if you want to, there's a lot that motivates us, but there are 5 major human motivators, and they're designed evolutionarily. And from a human development standpoint, they come on in this order usually. Curiosity is the fundamental human motivator. It's designed to be built into passion. Passion is designed to be built into purpose. Once you have purpose, what does the system want next? It wants autonomy, the freedom to pursue that purpose. Once you have autonomy, what's the next thing you want? Mastery, the ability to pursue it well. Those are the biggest 5 drivers we have at an intrinsic level. And you get all of them right, you get flow, which sort of cements and supercharges everything. And you don't even if you get a couple of them right, because they all produce dopamine. Curiosity, when you're curious, there's a little bit of dopamine, drives focus, drives you towards flow. Passion, even more dopamine. Purpose, dopamine plus a bunch of other pro-social neurochemicals that also tighten focus, right? That's the game you're playing when it comes to that stuff. And passion's just great. Peter Diamandis, who I've written a bunch of books with and is one of my dear friends and started the X-Prize Foundation, he always likes to say, and he's started 28 companies or some ridiculous number of companies, that when it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you've been up for 4 days straight trying to fix your startup. If you don't have passion, you're done. And that's sort of passion is, it keeps us gritty. It keeps us persistent. It's just too hard otherwise. It's the same thing. And I always tell people, when you're trying to build curiosity into passion, don't start with one curiosity. Look for 3 or 4 things that you're curious about and find places that they intersect. And by the way, if you don't know how to do that, use ChatGPT. It's phenomenal for finding those kinds of intersections, right? I'm curious about Mark Twain. I'm curious about Chinese food. How do they connect? Ask ChatGPT. It'll give you that answer. I used to train people to do this, and it would take fucking forever. Sometimes. No, I've got a tool for you now. It's called ChatGPT. It's built to do this. But it's fantastic. It's really actually good at that. But I always say if you can get to the intersection of 3 or 4 passions and play there for a while, really experiment and learn and just teach yourself, if it's sort of, that's got enough energy for passion, right? 3 or 4 curiosities, that's got enough energy for passion, and then you live there for a while and make sure it's really a passion, you're not going through a phase. Then you attach that to a purpose, a cause greater than yourself. How do you use this thing that lifts you up to lift up other people? And it sounds really like noble. It's not noble at all. You want the pro-social neurochemistry you get from caring about other people. From a performance standpoint, you want more flow, and more neurochemistry from caring about other people will give you more flow. It's really selfish. Purpose is really selfish. It turns out it's really good for the world, which, so like, I'm never going to say don't go for it, but from a performance standpoint, it's a totally selfish move in the game. But it's a good one. So I just think you want all those things pointed in the same direction. And the last thing I want to say there, the mistake I see people making the most, and this is, so if you were to come to me and be like, Steve, what are the top 5 peak performance mistakes you see people making? Somewhere on that list is people are super impatient to have a passion or a purpose, and they want it yesterday. And they, and especially if you're in the, the people who, the virtue signalers. If you're virtue signaling, your passion, your purpose is going to get you attention or get you laid, then you've got like you need your passion immediately because it's sexual selection and it's ego and it's absurd, because what you end up seeing is people spending immense amounts of time and money on this thing that is literally only a phase, or they're doing it for their ego, and like 2 or 3 years later they're going to burn out. And if you put a ton of yourself into something and it turns out it was just a phase, now in the end those phases actually work for you because they come together into something greater, but at the time it's really demotivating. And for people who aren't really gritty underneath, that can sort of like, it can sort of derail them. And I've seen, one of the things you notice as you get older, I was just having this conversation with a couple of friends of mine, is you see the people who get waylaid at different points, like who get taken out. And one of the things that you see taking people out is, oh man, I leaned into this for fucking 5 years and it didn't went away. I wasn't like, it was too hard. I wasn't into it, whatever. And that's a hard one to bounce back from. And life is short. So if you got derailed for 5 to 10 years, now you're playing from behind and it's a little more complicated, which is not to say you can't get back to where you want to be, but it's a little more complicated.
So with your book, The Art of Impossible, what I find really interesting, the way that I view it, it's like there's a wide divide between the phrase and the action plan behind that, where it's like the phrase, The Art of Impossible, big, grand idea, but it seems like very small and repetitive and process driven when it comes to putting in the action. It almost seems like there's an inverse relationship there between doing the impossible and the excitement factor from like an outsider's point of view. Obviously, like the one who's doing the work, you're going to be excited by it all because that's your purpose or your passion. But like from the outside looking in, it's almost like, oh wow, this is much more monotonous and ordinary than I would have thought. But it's more so like the impossible side of it comes into like the manner and the fashion you go about that work. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're exactly correct. If you get to the end of Art of Impossible, you see that peak performance is essentially a checklist. It's like 7 things you should try to do every day and 6 more things you should do every week, kind of. And people always want to ask me when I give speeches, my least favorite question, and it produces a very bad reaction. What are the 3 things I should do Monday morning? And my answer is always the same. It's fuck you. There's no 3 things you can do Monday morning. They're like, are you kidding? It's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, repeat. And it turns out peak performance is a checklist. It's a damn checklist. That's what it is. And the path to impossible is a checklist. Everything is a checklist. The secret to business. This is the thing nobody tells you. I don't care what business it is that you want to start, what you want to do in the fucking world. It's a checklist. Figure out what's the checklist. Execute the checklist. That's how you start a company. What is the checklist needed to start this company? Right? All of it, it's a checklist. Peak performance is a checklist. And where most people get derailed is they talk about the goal, they get a lot of dopamine, it feels really sexy, and then they start working towards it, and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to do the same thing over and over. Peter Diamandis and I were joking. It was Selena Silver at Abundance 360, Peter's big event a couple weeks ago. There were a bunch of us sitting around who also do the same thing for a living. And we were talking about like code for thought. Another way of saying thought leader is willing to stand on a stage and say the same thing over and over and over and over again. Like that's really like I've seen people taken out of this career because they want to say something different every time. I used to, when Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi was alive, I used to mess with him, be like, Mike, you got to fucking define flow twice a semester at the start of each class. I have to define it 4 times a day. 4 times a day. Just so you know, you do it twice a year. I do it 4 times a day, and I've done it for 20 years. That's the job. That, like, if you want to be a popularizer of ideas, if you want to bring flow to the masses, which is what one of the goals was, that's the job you're signing up for. And it's incredibly repetitive. And the people who succeed are the ones who are geeked. Like, you have to do this job, you have to be wired like a comedian. You want it. How do you make a micro tune in the speech to make it funnier or communicate better? That's got to be your thing. If that's not your thing, this job is not for you. Because that's really what the job is. Writing is the same thing. Sure, it's a creative whatever when I'm laying down the first draft and I'm freestyling, and then I'm really going to rewrite that same chapter 100 times before you see it. And are you willing to reread the same thing and make microtunes 100 times in a row? That's what gets you to the top of bestseller lists. And if you're not wired that way, don't do the job.
You said something to your longtime editor of 25 years that really stuck with them, is that when you're writing your to-do list, you're one person, but then you're a completely other person when you're acting on it. And you said, I just work for the boss. The boss is the guy who wrote the list. And I think that outlook is really, really interesting, where you don't want to work for the present version of yourself, or we always get
you work for the
mindset
best
of like,
version of yourself. You got to work for the best version of yourself.
yeah, exactly. Where it's like, I've heard you talk about you're working for the past tense version of yourself, because like that's the person who made the to-do list. And I think that's so true, because we've gotten into this mindset and it's become such like a buzzword of like, oh, like what would my future self want me to do? But it's like, what did your past tense self, like the person like you've already been, like what did that person like say that like you're supposed to do, and like stick to that plan?
To me, it's, I make my to-do list for the next day at the end of my day. I've already won my day. It's done. I'm about to go start my active recovery protocol. I'm going to make my to-do list for the next day so I can lower cognitive load. It helps me, recover better and sleep better. And in the middle of the to-do list, when I look at the next thing on the to-do list and it says taxes or something, like, you know what I mean? Like, I want to reach for the bottle. Like, start drinking now is my reaction to taxes or something, like, you know what I mean? Like, no. But I work for the boss. I don't have any choice in the matter. I also, like, a lot of this was useful to me, very much so, when I was thinking about as an athlete, as an action sport athlete. So sometimes, the thing on the to-do list is something scary and dangerous. I don't really want to do it. And, but I know when I'm done, I want to be the person who has done, that's what's next. So it's very useful. I work for the boss. This is, you know what I mean? I came to do a job. I'm going to do the job. And a lot of it came out of, back when I was a journalist, and we used to talk about it. In fact, my new novel, it has a journalist in it, and I actually put this in there. So in journalism, we talked about the difference between home games and away games. Home game is like you report the story at home, the environment's clear, everything. And away games are when you go to cover a war or you go to cover, whatever. And I always found that on away games, I would do anything to get the story. Like, I was literally like crazy. I mean, like, the amount of times I put my life on the line without even thinking about it to get the story to do the job. And I was like, oh, I'm a really goal-directed person. That's how, like, I'm wired that way. And I've really worked on getting my goal-directed system, like, to, it works really well for me. It keeps me motivated. So I was like, okay, so, like, as long as I treat it like an away game. So when I make a to-do list, the next day is an away game. That's how I think about it. Like I'm on a job. I got to just like do the job. And I just find it gives me more emotional distance. One of the things that I find um, very, very true and very, very hard for people to admit, and I've seen it almost in I like I've almost, I haven't seen anybody who is excused from it, is we lose a couple days a month to our emotions. We get just derailed, we get dysregulated, right? And it takes us out one way or another. We're either half there at work or you know what I mean? And so peak performance, some of it is just like getting that time back. It doesn't sound like a lot, right? You lose 3 days a month to your emotions. Okay, great. But there's 12 months a year. You've just given up a month and a half, essentially a month and 5 weeks to dysregulate. Like, and so if I can get control of that system a little bit, that means that I get a month and a half farther than you next year, right? And while I don't treat it as a competition, of course it's a competition. So, you know what I mean? And I'm competing against someone. I don't know exactly who they are, but they're somewhere. They're competing against me. Somebody wants my job and they're coming for me. And I can't afford to give up 5 weeks if I don't have to for like little stuff that you know what I mean? There's going to be enough stuff that's real that's going to dysregulate me. I don't need to get hung up on the smaller stuff. So I work for the boss. Keeps me out of it.
I love that framing, and I think that's something that I've definitely improved upon within my life, where it's like I've consciously been aware of like, okay, I'm shortening the gaps here between like getting derailed by certain things like that and getting deeper into, I guess, your identity when it comes to your work. Even though your focus is on science and research, at your core, you're an artist, and hearing you talk and the passion and the energy with which you talk, it sounds like an artist. How do you think all people could benefit from seeing their work, no matter what that work is, as a creative pursuit?
So um, this is fun. It's a funny question to me because to me, creativity is it's the invisible skill. It's the killer skill. So when we're done with this call, and or anybody listening, don't take my word for it. Like get to ChatGPT or Google and type in benefits of creativity. It goes on for pages, pages. I always talk about multi-tool solutions because I'm busy. I don't have time to solve problems one at a time. I need a single tool that's going to solve multiple problems at once. If you look at the performance benefits, the emotional benefits, the health benefits, the longevity benefits, the intelligence benefits, the financial benefits, I could keep going. It's literally pages and pages. And on top of all of it, creativity is a flow trigger in the actual act of creativity. So creativity is a multi-stage process. Most people, when we're talking about thinking creativity, they're thinking about like getting a good idea, a new idea, like insight. That's what they're thinking about. But there's an actual process there. It's packed with flow triggers. Creativity is the highest flow activity we can get. And if you master creativity, it also gives you a huge creative edge. Peter Diamandis and I just finished writing a new book on accelerated technology and how to thrive in the world ahead. And we talked to everybody you could possibly imagine for the book. And it was for experts in dozens of different fields, biotechnology, robotics, AI, it doesn't matter. And experts never agree on anything, as you know. And all these experts agreed on one thing. And I agree completely, which is over the next 10 to 20 years, for sure, might not be true after that, but definitely for the next 20 years, creatives in flow who can collaborate with each other and with AI will own the future. Full stop, period. Like that's, and we know if you resilience, at the core of resilience is adaptive flexibility. Adaptive flexibility is a fancy way of saying creative problem solving, right? Like if you want to thrive in the 21st century, that's the most important skill, right? And it all comes down to creativity. And here's the coolest fucking thing about all of this. Nobody trains creativity. It's like the forgotten skill. We train motivation. We set goals. We do all this stuff. We literally do all this stuff. And everybody wants more and more and more. And I don't have time for creativity. Start microdosing creativity into your day. Just like do a 10-minute drawing exercise, 10-minute writing exercise, something fun, something playful, something creative, and just do it every day for a month and see what happens to your life. Run the experiment. It's shocking how potent creativity is an intervention for. And I think most importantly, in my work around peak performance aging, the origin aging turns people off is a bad word. The longevity. In my work on longevity, that's the buzzword today. In my work on longevity, as we move into our late 40s and our 50s, we actually get treated, a whole suite of cognitive superpowers start coming online. We get access to new levels of intelligence and empathy and wisdom and perspective taking, all this other stuff, and creativity. But it's an if-then. It's a moderate. Psychologists call it a moderate. It's an if-then condition. You only get access to this stuff if your brain is thinking creatively. So there's a whole bunch of people in the peak performance space who are now like building sort of apps for older people that train them in creativity for this very reason. And this is not new stuff. This is Gene Cohn's work going back to the 70s or 80s. It's sort of like the peak performance aging as a field was founded on Ellen Langer's work and Gene Cohn's work. This was the discovery. Holy shit. We don't get dumber when we age. We get smarter. We get better. We get what? Whoa, right? And it has huge protection against dementia and Alzheimer's. And here's a crazy stat. And I can't, so I need to double check this. I'm not going to give it to you. It's a stat I can't back up and I don't know if it's real. But let's just say that creativity is the stats on creativity being neuroprotective against dementia and cognitive decline are a little crazy. Like the number I want to give you is that stat, but I actually, it's so crazy that I actually want to stop and I just saw it. Like I was doing research into creativity like a week ago and it popped up and I was like, that stat is crazy. That can't be real. I got to go back to it. And I was about to give you a stat that I haven't double checked. So let me not double check it, but it's a weird one, like how neuroprotective it is against cognitive decline. So it's this it's like we have this super muscle inside of us that none of us train, so we don't even know it's there, and it confers really significant advantages. Is it where I would start you? No. I would start with motivation, then we do learning, and then creativity. But the other thing is this, and here's the final point. Flow is a very creative state. And if you're not actually training creativity, it's hard to stabilize creativity and flow. I'll give you a classic example. So we talked about one of the classic flow problems. Here's another classic mistake, peak performance error thing that happens fairly frequently to people is flow's it's a turbo boost, right? It's like the car going 100 miles an hour. And when the car is going 20 miles an hour and you hit a tree, you have a fender bender. But when it's going 100 miles an hour and you hit a tree, you have a problem. And flow is this massive acceleration and it's built on up-leveling motivation, learning, and creativity. But if you don't train those skills out of flow, it's like you've got a car going 100 miles an hour and all the wheels are loose. Sooner or later, right? And creativity is where a lot of people get derailed because it's the thing they don't train. These days, everybody's so down with peak performance and I want to train this stuff and I want to do this stuff. And they're attacking it like everybody attacks it like as if Anders Ericsson's ideas about deliberate practice were right across the board. Anders was a friend of mine. I really like his work. As he said, they're great if you're trying to learn something like math or violin, but in most every other situation, deliberate play outperforms deliberate practice. It's a creative learning style. Why? Play gives us more neurochemicals, more dopamine, better chance it'll go from short-term holding to long-term storage. We learn better. So it amplifies it. And all these things tie back to creativity. And if you're at this point in your journey and you really want to, that's why I'm doing the Alliance, right? For any of you who's curious, flowalliance.co, www.flowalliance.co. You can just check it out there. But it's just this, I was like, holy crap. Everybody's coming to me. They've been training with me for like 5 years now. I've trained a fuck ton of people and they want to keep training. And I was like, well, what are they missing? What's missing? And I would talk to them and I was like, oh my God. It's creativity is this like crazy muscle. And so Yeah, I talk like an artist and I come out of those cultures and I'm weird and I'm all those things that artists are. But as a peak performance guy, this is a really big lever. And it's a lever that most people aren't training because it feels flimsy. It doesn't feel real to most people, right? It like, it's hard for me to convince you that you're going to get way more productive by getting more creative. That doesn't seem to correlate. It does because creativity drives flow and flow drives productivity, and like, you're there. But the thing I was going to say, where people train flow, get into flow before they're ready, they haven't trained creativity. This is where they get derailed by tangents. So you see writers all the time, they're like, how do you like not get distracted? And I'm like, yeah, this is because you haven't mastered creativity yet. You don't sort of understand how the process works. And people who are better at creativity, how to avoid writer's block, how to avoid innovator's block. Know your starts and endings. Know where you're starting and where you're going. Your brain is a pattern recognition system. It'll connect the dots automatically. But if you don't know where you're going, same reason we like clear goals. We're goal-directed systems. So if you don't give the brain a goal, it doesn't know where to go. And then tangents are delicious. Let's go in that direction. And that happens in, you know, the art of storytelling known as novel writing. It also happens in the art of storytelling known as starting a company, right? You get distracted by all the shiny new products and whatever, and you forget that your job is to sell this, not to do all those other things. You see, it's the same problem. It's a flow problem. It's what happens when people haven't actually mastered creativity. They don't understand the amount of focus and training that creativity is a big fire hose. You have to, it's a weapon. You got to know how to wield it.
You've dedicated yourself to learning about flow state. What do you think you've learned about yourself in the process?
Oh, I don't know. You pick a neighborhood. In which direction do you want me to answer that question? I've learned a ton about myself in the process. I think, well, let me actually answer it the way that the most human answer I can give you is I think I've learned the same lesson that everybody learns on a high flow path, which is holy shit, I had no idea what I was capable of. Right? Like that's the experience of that's what flow brings to a life where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I got this far. And oh my God, I can't like that's what happens. It's compound interest. And the fun part about like being on the compounding side of it is the stuff that starts showing up in your life is wildly beyond your imagination. That's what gets really interesting is when flow leads you to a path where you're like, wow, I actually am living a life now that is beyond anything I could have imagined. I've gotten farther than I actually thought, right? That's what a path flow. And that's what it's taught me about me. Cause I was a remarkably ordinary kid. Remarkably, I think I've been a remarkably ordinary all along the way, but I've gotten pretty far and way farther than, I thought I was going to way farther than most people thought I was going to get. I mean, most people thought I was going to be dead when I was 30. And when I was a little kid, I was literally the kid that parents warned other children not to play with. Don't play with Steven. He's crazy. He's dangerous. Yeah, I was that kid. Um, and by the way, I was crazy and I was dangerous. And you probably shouldn't have had like that was good advice. Like it wasn't like I'm not mad at that. Like they were giving their kids good advice. Like really, it was solid. You were helping.
Stephen, have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation today. Where can people go to see more of your work with flow state and everything there?
Yeah, StephenKotler.com, flowalliance.co. You want to see the work that we did at the Flow Research Collective, the hardcore neuroscience research, flowresearchcollective.com. Um, I'm at Stephen Kotler on the socials.
Awesome. Great speaking with you today.
That was really fun, Tim. You did your homework. Thank you for that. Appreciate that.